Right, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our local association president, Phil Pierce, who is going to be chairing for us, and I'll allow him to introduce, and I will mute myself, which I'll be glad of.
Hello, good evening, and thank you everyone for taking your time this evening. I'm going to start this evening by introducing our panelists, and then I will give each panelist 3 minutes to give an opening statement before we then move on to the questions. So I think I'll go straight into our introductions in alphabetical order. We have Jim Campbell for the Conservatives, and Jim has lived in Edinburgh for 50 years, studied at 3 universities in the city and worked at a 4th. Jim says he has a wide range of experience, including driving lorries, running an international student exchange, teaching academic research, business startups, small business owner, and working as a manager for a major retailer. He was first elected in 2017 and represents the 4th ward in council. Our second panelist tonight is Adam Mcveigh, and he has been the leader of the council for the last 5 years and is the SNP councillor for Leith and is kindly standing in for Eddie Bird tonight. For the Green Party, we have Ross Muller, who is a school teacher for 8 years, has been an EIS member for 8 years and is the Scottish Green Party candidate for Pentland Hills ward in Edinburgh. And he says that he has helped lead the National Value Teachers Value Education campaign in 2018 at a local level, helping to ensure that our teachers are properly valued and that our education system continues to get it right for every child. And we also have with us tonight Richard Parker for Labour. And Richard is a secondary school teacher. Richard says he became a teacher because he wanted to make a transformative change in the lives of those around him, to help students find the language to discover who they are and to develop the courage to dream big and build the skill set to succeed in an ever-changing world. So what I shall do now is go over to our panelists. I'll introduce them one at a time, and each will have 3 minutes to tell us more about themselves. So I'll start with Richard Parker first. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Phil. Good evening, everyone. My name's Richard Parker. I'm a secondary school teacher in the City of Edinburgh Council, and I am the Labour candidate for Christopher and Murrayfield. I want to start off today by sharing with you why I decided to put myself forward to stand for election. And I guess it will come as no surprise, and from the introduction I've just had from Phil, it's because I want to be a champion for our young people, our educators, and the staff that make up our school communities. I firmly believe that education is the most transformative power for good in society. It provides the opportunities and key skills we need for life and work. It gives our young people the space to make mistakes and develop relationships. It teaches us that we can dream big and helps us find the language we need to understand ourselves. However, our schools are in crisis. And this is not the fault of our teachers or staff or the curriculum. This crisis is the consequence of years of underfunding, widening inequality, and a mental health epidemic. To effectively combat this, we must support our education system with proper resources, funding and staffing, as well as combating the root causes of poverty and poor mental health by ensuring that all citizens have secure and well-paying jobs in well-insulated, sustainable and affordable housing. Tonight, I'm going to lay out how Labour plan to do this. The pandemic and its impact on the attainment gap is an excellent place to start, as it has been the spectre hanging over the classroom and has caused many of my colleagues to name this year as the most challenging of their professional careers. The attainment gap in education was widening before the pandemic struck. COVID-19 has made a bad situation worse. We in Edinburgh Labour recognise this as a key priority for the coming council session, and that inequality profoundly affects the opportunities for our children and young people. We plan to address this from the early years, which lays the foundations for all learning and social development throughout nursery, primary and secondary schooling, and in play and youth provision. I want to lay out now 3 key policies that will accomplish the same. 1, by providing study space and developing personalised and targeted tuition programmes, we will help to enable pupils to catch up. By increasing the number of qualified pupil support assistants to guarantee support for all nursery, primary, and first and second year high school classes, as well as improving their pay, terms and conditions. By coordinating with organisations outside of the school building and ensuring access to activities and clubs for all 5 to 12-year-olds. I imagine more of our manifesto commitments will arise naturally throughout the night as I respond to your questions. I will also be sharing a link in the chat at the end. I want to conclude my introduction by bringing to your attention, if perhaps it wasn't already in your mind, that our college lecturers are on strike. After more than a decade of stagnant wages, rising inflation, and the cost of living crisis, they need fair pay. I'm going to be joining them on Thursday between getting out the vote sessions, but you can join them tomorrow as well and help to show your support. Thank you. I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Richard. Apologies if there was a bit of a beep there. That was a 3-minute timer going off. I don't know if that was picked up or not. And also, I'm not sure if you were pinned. There may have been a section of that where we couldn't actually see you. I don't know if that was the same on everyone's screen or just mine. I'm not sure if you were aware of that, Alison.
It was fine for me. I think that may have been you. So.
Oh, right. Okay, that's fine.
Sorry.
That's fine.
Also,
Okay, so.
Sorry, Phil, I forgot to say, I did say this in the message, but I should have said to everyone, this is being recorded. So anyone who doesn't want to be on a recording, make sure you've got your camera off. Sorry, I meant to say that at the start.
Okay, thank you. So moving on, could we move on to Ross, please?
Friends, colleagues, I've been in education now for 8 years, and in that time in the classroom, I've learned a lot about the importance of getting it right, not just for our children and young people, but also for those of us on the video call this evening. We know that day in, day out, teachers always aim to get it right for every child. This election is also about Gurfet, getting it right for every teacher. That's why giving the Scottish Greens your first preference vote in the upcoming election matters, because we're not just talking about what we'd like to happen, we're delivering in government. For example, we've helped make free school meals for every Scottish child a reality up to P5, to be extended to P7 by August, along with some pilot rollouts in some secondary schools. The Scottish Greens are standing up for families by helping deliver a doubling of the Scottish child payment to £20, being uplifted soon to £25 per week per child by the end of this year. Some 10,500 children are already benefiting from this increase in Edinburgh, right here in our capital city. There's more good news. Some 35,000 children and young people will be benefiting when all children under 16 become eligible. That means tackling the poverty-related attainment gap head on. It means children having the best start each day. Being in the classroom, I know the pressures each and every one of us face. Teacher well-being, issues of workload. Indeed, a recent EIS survey in January this year showed 88% of members said that their workload burden had increased during the pandemic. Issues of pay and conditions need to be addressed so teaching becomes an attractive profession to join. In short, a vote for the Scottish Greens is a vote to elect a strong Green team of councillors, working hard inside the city chambers for our teachers. Working hard too alongside our Green MSPs in the fight to keep class sizes down, increase mental health support for our learners and address fair pay, temporary contracts and crucially, teacher workload.
Thank you, Ross. Under time as well. Well done. Moving on to Adam, please.
thank you very much, and thank you very much for organising tonight and having me along. I'll be a poor substitute for Ellie Bird, our education spokesperson, I assure you, but hopefully you bear with me. We've set out a very ambitious manifesto, and it's a very holistic manifesto because it talks about all of the factors that impact on residents' lives and young people's lives. I think Richard already said at the start, some of those underpinning impacts on a young person's life can be debilitating when they're trying to get into the classroom, and teachers know the impact on the absolute assault on the poorest in our society by the UK government and the benefits regime that they have so callously built. I do want to thank Alison for her continuing engagement from the EIS. It's hugely valuable to have our trade union colleagues sitting around the table, raising issues, discussing them frankly and honestly and openly, but it gives us an opportunity to lean into some of these. And I hope that some people who have been involved in those discussions would agree that over the last 5 years, we've seen real progress on some of the big things that we have to get right. Our city is a fantastic city. It's the best in the world, but it is not equal. And the experience that people have of Edinburgh is not an equal one. We will see in the next council term the first generation of children coming into the school system, into the primary system, who have benefited from the 1140 free nursery hours. I think getting it right starts as early as possible. It's why the SNP has driven forward policies like the baby box and 1140 hours to make sure people are supported at the earliest possible time. And I think policies like this are going to make a difference to young people's experience in the classroom when they come through. But it's never too late to get it right for every child. Just, I think last week, or maybe the week before, I was visiting the new Castle Bray. Fantastic new investment in education, but crucially a fantastic investment in the young people in that community. The sense of spirit, of optimism, of positivity within that school community is not just about the shiny new building that provides a world-class learning environment. It's about the investment that that school has put in from PEF funding into supporting those with the lowest level of attainment, who are usually the lowest level of attenders. And by supporting people through that, it makes it far easier for the young people to access that education and actually get to school, get in the classroom, and it makes it far easier for the teachers as well. In the last 5 years, we've seen hundreds more, literally hundreds more classroom assistants and teachers in our system in Edinburgh. That's a good thing, but I am not blind to the enormous challenge that we have and the enormous need in our city. We do need to go further and make sure we can support everybody in what I think has already been acknowledged by previous speakers, one of the most difficult policy regimes from the UK government that we've seen, and people do feel like their life chances are literally being ripped away. Our job is to make sure we can support people as best we can, and our programme on education and housing can do just that. And I look forward to discussing that in our policies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adam. And finally, let's move on to Jim. Thank you very much, Jim.
Hello, so I'm Jim Campbell, and I was first elected in 2017. So to add to my list of experiences, I've been a councillor for 5 years, and it's been a very interesting experience. I was a teacher not quite a long time ago, and I'm not going to pretend I was a particularly good teacher. I probably wasn't, and I decided it wasn't for me. I moved on to other things, but I do have some sense of the pressure that teachers face in the classroom and in the school. And what I observed then, and I think what we can still see, is that we don't always maximize the opportunities for young people, and we don't always encourage them to think of everything they possibly could do. I think we could do more to boost expectations. And I think we can see that also in some of the results that Scotland's currently producing. So it is worrying that the trend for in literature, language and maths and science are going down rather than up, and that our international comparisons are not improving. And I understand they are now dropping below that of our neighbour and friend, England. And that's quite depressing, because all my life, Scottish education's been special. And I'm a product of Scottish education. I've never studied anywhere else other than in Scotland. And we always believed it was special. And I think we're losing some of that, or we're losing some of it in an objective sense. We maybe still believe it's special. And so what I'm very interested to hear tonight is to hear from people that are still teaching and that have far more expertise in this area than I will have, about what it is we can do at a council level to improve the performance of our schools in Edinburgh. That is not going to mean massive changes in budget settings, because the council simply does not have that under our control. There are many things that the council can potentially do, and there are many things that are not open to it because either resources or legislation would not allow it. But where we can make a difference in Edinburgh, I would like us to see us make that difference and see if we can get our Edinburgh schools to the top performing schools in Scotland for all our students, including closing the attainment gap, because some of our least advantaged students are not doing nearly well enough. And the question that really is the forefront of my mind is, do we have the right leadership in the City of Edinburgh Council in this area? And those of you that have followed the press locally will be aware of significant challenges and scandals in this area. And again, what I don't know is how that's impacting you day to day. And I'm very interested to learn more about that. So I think that's everything.
Great, thank you, Jim. Okay, so we'll move on swiftly to the questions. So I'll ask the questions first and then invite the panelists in turn to answer them. And I'll try, or we will try and keep the answers limited to 2 minutes if we can. So the first question this evening relates to contracts. And we've had a lot of questions from staff who are concerned about the lack of permanent contracts. Many Edinburgh teachers are on temporary contracts for years, and this is incredibly unsettling. It prevents them from getting things like mortgages and even drives some of them to leave the profession. We also know many PSAs are employed on rolling temporary contracts, which also leads to many to seek more secure employment. On top of this, there are obvious impacts on pupils. So to put just one of the many questions we've had on this topic to you, here is a question from, excuse me, an Edinburgh teacher and EIS member, Claire Robertson. At this point every year, many colleagues have to apply for jobs in new schools because their temporary contract runs out. Will your party show that you understand the importance of trusting relationships between pupils and their teacher and support the increase in the number of permanent contracts in our schools? And could I ask Adam to respond to that first, please?
Well, thank you for the question. I absolutely agree. It is a significant challenge. Edinburgh, probably more than any other place in Scotland, has had an enormous challenge in making sure that we can get the right staff in the right schools, and the transient nature of some of those communities has meant that actually some of the school roles has fluctuated quite dramatically, causing the needs for some of those temporary arrangements. I do think that we have got to a point where we need to provide more certainty. I absolutely understand the concern. I absolutely understand the need to build in more security for people if they're to stay in what is a really crucial function for the council, not just in terms of teaching staff, but in terms of that support staff within schools as well. So it is absolutely something that we need to look at and minimise. I don't think I'm able, and my job here is, of course, to try and work through these issues with people and collaboratively get to a positive outcome. But I don't think at this point I can say we can eradicate it from the system. And I think that's because of the aspects of transience and other factors within the school roles themselves. However, I think it needs to be minimised, and I think the maximum level of staff possible need to be on that permanent contract. This is not just about education, it's also, of course, about fair work, which we are trying to build in fair working hours to all our council staff. But as things stand right now, I think we're working towards that as an aim, but we're not going to be able to, in the immediate term, flick a kind of switch and get everyone onto permanent contracts. But it is something that we're absolutely committed to working to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Ross?
The short answer is yes. I'm quite appalled, frankly. Scottish figures show from 2018-19 that only 38% of newly qualified teachers went into full-time permanent contracts with local authorities. I think that's quite scandalous, and similarly with classroom assistants, what we need are permanent contracts. It's good for the school, it improves that bond that schools have with their staff, it improves bonds, crucially, that children, many of who have extra emotional and social and behavioural issues, who depend on classroom assistants, they need that bond. That can't just be term to term. So what Scottish Greens will be doing in Education Committee, and also we'll be voting on budgets when they come, is to ensure that the council takes on teaching staff and also classroom assistants on a full-time permanent basis. I think there's also a feeling for those that are on temporary contracts that there is a constant need to impress. There's a constant unnecessary stress related with that. That's not what teachers need. That's not what classroom assistants need. We need to move away from a pressurised environment towards one that a school should be, which is a place of learning. And I think although there's legislation to protect those on temporary contracts, quite often, a lot of the time when I'm speaking to colleagues, they actually feel they need to constantly perform to impress those in management so that they'll be kept on for the next term. I mean, I completely understand from a school's point of view why, or a council's point of view, why temporary contracts are convenient. So, for example, if there's a child in P7 who needs support, they then, of course, go off to high school. But we need to shift away from that. I think post-COVID, it's absolutely essential that people have security in their employment, and we will seek to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to come back to something that Adam said, of course, that permanent teachers who are on permanent contracts can always be redeployed to other schools. But I think we should move on now to Richard.
If you don't mind, many are sorry to come back on the comeback, but many are employed directly with the schools, which is a massive complication in doing that, obviously. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to cut across here as local association secretary. All Edinburgh teachers, they may be in secondaries interviewed by school, but if they're a CEC teacher, they have a contract with Edinburgh City Council, and if they are a permanent employee, Edinburgh can redeploy them. And that is happening right now in some of our city centre schools, where staff on permanent contracts and that school has a falling role, they are being redeployed. So this idea that, of course, school roles have always fluctuated, that's why we have the redeployment. There is no one who is directly employed by a City of Edinburgh school. That's not how our contracts work. It is that you are within the city. That's why we need more permanents, because we can even out we can even out the supply, but we need to get people permanent, because what they are doing at the moment is they are leaving Edinburgh because they will go to a council that will employ them. And I have worked directly with people who have made exactly that decision.
Okay, thank you.
I may not have been clear in terms of hire and employ, and I accept that.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we move on to Richard then, please?
Thank you, Phil. So brilliant question from Claire, and I really want to focus down on the relationships aspect of it, because as was said before, that those relationships that you build with your students takes time, and by having staff with a permanent contract, you get the most out of your pupils. They know you, you know them, you're able to differentiate appropriately for their needs, and you're able to make sure that you're getting it right for them. So in short, you know, do we support more permanent contracts? And yes, we absolutely do. However, we need to make sure that we fight for the funding to get it. So I'm sure some of you are aware that Edinburgh City Council is the least funded in Scotland. And to come back to Jim's earlier point, you know, how do we improve teaching? Well, we need to reverse this chronic underfunding, and we need to rapidly address the inequality that many of our students and young people are growing up in. And that's how we can deliver our transformative change. That's how we can bring Scottish education back to the high water mark that I believe he is remembering. So we need to bring these teachers on. We need to relook at this idea of what should we be getting in funding for Edinburgh. And, you know, the buck rests not in Westminster, it rests in Holyrood. And we need to put pressure on the Greens and the SNP to make sure that local authority funding is appropriate, and that a good share of that funding is then going into our schools.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And Jim, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Edinburgh is a very competitive labour market, and I think we struggle sometimes to recruit the number of teachers that we need, particularly in some of the more specialist subjects. So I think there's always going to be some temporary or short-term contracts. I mean, that's probably in everybody's interest. There are probably some teachers that would not wish to commit to a long-term contract. But is the split we have just now right? No, I don't think so. I think one thing we can do as a local authority, one thing we have control over, is to try and offer as many people as possible permanent contracts, because that helps to solve our challenge of recruitment. And it seems to me that would be a fairly obvious thing for us to do.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to our second question, which is relating to school funding. And this is a question that it's an anonymous question from a head teacher in Edinburgh, but other similar concerns have been raised by other Edinburgh teachers. The question is that my DSM budget is cut to the bone. The pupil resource budget for each child is dipping below £40 a year. Further, I am in constant fear of clawbacks and of finding out that financial information I have been given is incorrect. What will the parties do to increase the money devolved directly to schools? And will they offer a guarantee that there'll be no more clawbacks? Could I have Ross first, please?
Well, we want to ensure, and as a teacher in the classroom, I know the importance of, for example, PEF funding, money that goes directly to head teachers and staff to choose resources and to pick different things that will enhance the learning of the children. In terms of other funding available for schools, there has been a slight decrease in the amount of PEF funding available this year. But of course, the Scottish Attainment Challenge goes a great way to try and address some of particularly the attainment gap issues. It's really important that for schools to budget, that they have a full awareness, a full ability to account for their finances. Clawing back money is not something that we would vote for. So after the council elections, and I think this is perhaps an important point, there's going to have to be consensus amongst parties, because no parties put forward enough candidates to win the election. There's going to have to be a consensus, a cross-party negotiation, whether it's a coalition, something less formal. So it's really important that parties work this out. In terms of budgets, I think it's crucial that schools have the ability to plan for their finances. No clawbacks, no strings attached for schools. I think it's really, really important.
Okay, thank you. Jim.
Yes, so other things being equal, yes, we would like to see head teachers have an increase in their directly controlled budget and have some more freedom insofar as we can give it in the way they choose to spend that budget. We would like the Scottish Government to do that with the funds that they direct, if they could be persuaded. And in although I think there may be some legal constraints regarding clawbacks to do with local government funding, in general, we would not like teachers to be put in that position, head teachers to be in that position, because we think it will undermine their incentive and ability to plan and sensibly deploy the funds that they have responsibility for.
Thank you, Jim. Adam?
Thanks. So quite a few things to say. I think PEF has been transformative in relation to school budgets. I think that's really opened up the opportunity. When I've spoken to my head teachers and head teachers across the city and what that money's went to, it's really transformed some of that support to get under the skin of those causes that have really held attainment back and have really driven that forward. On DSM budgets itself, I'll say two things. One, the council does need to look at where there are consistent problems and fund them properly. It's not good enough to ask schools to fund major pieces of investment through their relatively small funds within them. So, for instance, funding around iPads and the rollout of iPads was delivered by this administration. That will complete this year. We've got a firm pledge on that. That's going really well right across the schools. That's a huge programme of tens of millions of pounds to get that kit into young people's hands. And I would also point out the investment in school buildings itself is making a difference to some of those things that head teachers felt they had to fork out money for, to try and make the learning experience bearable for some of the young people and teaching experience bearable for some of the teachers as well. Huge investment in the last 5 years, and we're committing to £140 million investment in the existing school estate to try and deal with some of those issues as well. On the DCM budget calculation, which is, there's two things we're looking at here. There's one, what is the overall budget that's devolved to schools? And I would love to see that set as high as possible. But the other bit within that is, where is it going? And I'm going to say something that might not make me universally popular on this call, but it needs to go in the areas of highest need. And when you look at underspends across schools, which I have done in minute detail and spoken to head teachers in great detail on a one-to-one basis across different schools about this, it's essentially that schools in more affluent areas are spending less of that money and carrying it forward and are able to plan better. And I'm sorry if that makes me a target, and some people will want to throw something at their screen at me, and I'm absolutely sure of that. But that's what the data looks like. And that tells me that areas of real chronic needs need more money. Now, I would absolutely love to be able to put more into those areas. And that's what
I'll need to move you along, I'm afraid, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Thanks very much. And Richard.
Thank you, Phil. So just to come back to the question, head teachers should be in charge of their funding, and no, once it's given, it should not be clawed back. To talk a little bit more broadly about PEF, and I'm sure Adam would be really pleased to hear that we all got our iPads issued today, and we're going to be training on how we can use them, and they're going to be rolled out to our students starting in August, so well ahead of the December deadline. I do believe that these will make an impact once we have the systems in place for enhanced learning. But it's still not, resolving the problem that many of our young people, when they take them home, will be using hotspots, or perhaps even a family hotspot to use these iPads. So, the gap in IT access is, has been closed slightly by this, but we also need to make sure that our young people are able to use these iPads, that they have a connection to the internet so that it can be used to the extent that it might be. To talk about PEF funding is one area that it's not always claimed, and part of this is there's a stigma attached to identifying as a young carer, or there's something keeping young people back from claiming this. So in Edinburgh Labour, we have a bold and ambitious plan to start bringing council services back in-house. And through doing this, we hope to destigmatise this idea of being a young carer and claiming PEF funding. So I think, one, we must fight for greater funds to be put into our schools. I was at the another Edinburgh is Possible Hustings last week, and Adam's colleague Kate Campbell committed to going to Holyrood, to demanding more funding. And I'm just wondering, Adam, will you do the same?
Okay, so thank you, Richard. I see you're both muted at the moment. I think we'll move on to our next question, which is an equalities question, and this comes from Edinburgh teacher and EIS member Maria Devoy. Edinburgh is not alone in having woefully few teachers from BAME backgrounds in promoted posts. What actions will the parties take to improve this situation? In particular, I draw your attention to Sunday's article in the Herald, where Rowena Arshad, a noted expert in this field, said that the City of Edinburgh Council ought to go ahead with its plan to ring-fence some temporary promoted posts for BAME candidates, as Section 158 of the Equality Act allows for action that might otherwise be positive discrimination, where there has been persistent underrepresentation. Will you commit to reviewing the legal advice around these posts? And what else will you do to support BAME staff? And I'd like to put that question first to Jim, please.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, I saw that article. I think I've not seen the legal advice from council officers on this, so it's difficult for me to comment with any great knowledge. And I assume that they have brought that advice forward because of genuine concern. I think our starting point, Phil, would be to always try to appoint the best candidate for any job, and that to try and support any teacher in the city, no matter what their background, so that they can be the best teacher and in turn the best candidate for any job they wish to apply for. So I think that would be our starting point. And I think also, I mean, we've just had a discussion about temporary contracts. So again, are we wanting to have temporary contracts or permanent contracts? I think my preference would be to appoint permanently for head teachers where at all possible, rather than to make temporary appointments.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Adam.
Thanks. We do have a problem in the city of underrepresentation of BAME teaching staff in senior roles. It's a problem we need to admit, it's a problem we need to accept, and it's a problem we need to face up to. I'm afraid I don't quite share the view that the legal advice can be pushed past, but that's not to say that that's an excuse for inaction. It should never be an excuse for inaction. What we have done, and what I'll ensure is driven forward, is by working with the those in the teaching staff already, we can pull together support and sort of buddy up with senior officials. So the programme right now is about saying people who have already completed that route and get them to really enable and push and collaborate and help people through that system by kind of buddying up and being that support system of advice and sort of link in people instinctively go with routes that they can see. And if you can't see it, you can't be it. And having at least people who have trod that path can make a real difference. In the last 5 years, the council, and I'm speaking slightly more generally, although we do have teachers part of the network, the BAME network has been created, and it followed the same model as actually the LGBTQ+ network in the council staff. These have been really good networks of support, and through that BAME network, there's been enormous collaboration and support amongst our incredibly diverse workforce, and I think that's been a real enabler. But fundamentally, this is about setting out the trajectories that people need and helping them get to that position. So while I'm a little, while I think legal advice can't be pushed through in a sense, we do still need action. And I think the action that we've set out in terms of supporting people on an individual basis with senior management is absolutely the right thing to do. And I just hope that senior management take that responsibility. I know they're passionate about this. I really hope they take that responsibility and push through and help support people.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Ross.
So I think the people that deserve utmost recognition for this are actually EIS, through the EIS BAME network, who I know offer bespoke anti-racism learning sessions. You know, I've been made aware of that, you know, for many years, and I think EIS have really led on this. I think 2 key points. I think Glasgow City Council have sort of shown real leadership with this in terms of guaranteeing job applicants an interview for support for learning posts. Perhaps that's something that Edinburgh could emulate, a guarantee for support staff with the necessary qualifications, a guaranteed interview from BAME backgrounds. I think the second point is perhaps leadership teams within schools may need some additional training just around unconscious bias, and actually that is something that we can look at. So I think those 3 key points, but just to reiterate, I think the work that EIS has done has been, you know, phenomenal with this.
Okay, thank you, Ross. And Richard.
Thank you. Great question. So Scotland's classrooms are diverse, and we need to make sure that our staff is diverse too. And I, think that the legal advice could be reviewed. We have to recognise the intersectionality of injustice that is affecting BAME candidates. And to come back to Jim, I think the reason that temporary promoter posts is mentioned in the question is it's to provide a bridge to a permanent promoted post, and obviously that would be the ideal destination. Alongside this, we need to make sure that BAME candidates are helped and supported onto PGDE programs. It's a year that's unpaid, and I know that can be very daunting for many candidates.
Thank you very much. So moving on to our next question. This one is related to COVID, and it comes from Ian Mullen, who is a health and safety rep in Unison. And I'd just like to say here that the unions have been working very closely together to support schools, and something that we at the EIS welcome, and we hope we will continue. So the UK and Scottish government's decision to remove all COVID restrictions is causing extreme anxiety for those individuals that are deemed clinically high risk, and reduces further their quality of life as it restricts their ability to actively engage in community activities without increased risk of infection. Statistics have shown that deprived areas, minority ethnic groups, other characteristics, and the low paid have been severely impacted by the pandemic. All frontline staff, students, and service users deserve improved protection from further risk infection. Unison have campaigned for the retention of all current safety measures, including mask wearing, and the increased installation of CO2 units and high efficiency particulate filtration units in all workplaces and public buildings. HEPA units have been proven to be 95.5% effective in the removal of bacteria, viruses, including COVID, and other hazardous dusts from the working environment, and have long-term health benefits beyond COVID for those individuals with respiratory health conditions such as asthma and bronchitis via improved air quality. As an elected member of this new administration, will you campaign to reinstate health, safety and well-being measures into workplaces and public buildings and put political pressure on the Scottish Government to fund the installation of more CO2 and HEPA units? Can we start, please, with Ross?
So it's really important, thanks Phil, to remember that we're still in this pandemic. The infection rates, unfortunately, the number of people passing away from this is not where it should be. We're still in the middle of this. The Scottish Greens have called for twice weekly testing within schools and for senior pupils. We have also called for teachers. Ross Greer, our Education Secretary, our education spokesperson, argued that teachers were prioritised for vaccinations and booster jabs after elderly people. In terms of ventilators, the Scottish Government, that of course is part of the Butte House Agreement, that the Greens for the first time are now part of the government in Scotland. We, since January 2022, have made available £5 million of funding for ventilators, because as the stats, Phil, you've just said, are impressive with this. I think the example of South Korea is probably the one to be looking at, because South Korea, the authorities there very early on installed ventilation equipment, not just in schools, but in care homes and other points of gatherings. So I would just also add with ventilators and with CO2 monitors that councils must take this very seriously, because this is a health and safety issue. It's a health and safety issue for children and for staff. And if councils don't, they may just face, a large compensation bill from people claiming industrial injury.
Thank you. Richard.
Thank you. So throughout the pandemic, it has been an open window and an open door. And, that's how that's how I've been ventilating my classroom. So yeah, it would be brilliant to have HEPA filters and pieces of technology that can make the classroom environment safer. I think testing makes a lot of sense, and having, lateral flows available and, having students and staff encouraged to use it makes a lot of sense. Masks is something that we'd like to consult with the teaching union on before we come to any kind of decision there, and looking at the public health advice. But it doesn't hurt us to be cautious, and it can cost us a lot if we're not. So I think there is a good case for being careful as we go on, because obviously it's very nice at the minute having things slightly more relaxed in schools. I haven't had a warn and inform letter in more than a month and a half, which is a very pleasant turn of events. But I think we're all aware in the back of our mind that things could take a turn for the worse at very little notice. And, rather than rushing headlong into a disaster waiting to happen, a little bit of caution would go a long way.
Okay, thank you. Jim.
Thank you. So I probably wouldn't be in favour of the introduction of, or the reintroduction of masks at this juncture. I note there was some research published recently demonstrating it had a very detrimental impact on the early development of speech in babies and young people. So I think there are significant negative impacts from mask wearing, potentially. On the other hand, I completely agree on the ventilation point. And as Adam might remember, I actually brought a motion on this very topic to City of Edinburgh Council, asking for the council to do more to ventilate public buildings. And I'm very grateful that that eventually was agreed. And actually, I think Edinburgh's done not too bad a job in this area. I'm not an expert in other Scottish local authorities, but I certainly understand that our facilities management people were trying to assist schools pretty early on in the pandemic to understand the challenges around ventilation. And the monitoring of CO2 is a very useful technique, not just to understand how clean the air is, but also how good the air is for learning and teaching. Some of that could be forced mechanical systems, as have been described, but actually, if we go back to Victorian engineering, we can look at buildings that achieve very high levels of ventilation without any mechanical systems at all. So there's a lot we've forgotten in terms of hygiene and airborne diseases, which we could perhaps revisit and introduce back into some of our public spaces, including schools. I'm not sure if I've covered all the points there, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And Adam.
Thank you. I'm heartened to hear Richard say that he hasn't had a ping in some time, but I'm actually not surprised, because from the data over the last few weeks and months, we've seen a decline. The week before the Easter holiday, the numbers fell about 25% in terms of impact on the school estate across the city. So, and that was part of a kind of downward trend. So the numbers are not in a horrendous position. And obviously from a kind of standing start of Easter holidays, we're not seeing them yet. Anyway, I'm touching wood as I'm speaking, creep up. I think we've moved into another phase of this, which is we need to look at everything in a kind of where practicable step. I don't think a continuation of masks in perpetuity is necessarily the best thing for the staff or certainly for the children in that learning environment. Also, frankly, is going to start creating a bit of a divide in those who were wearing and weren't wearing. And anecdotally, that's what I was hearing from some schools. But we are in a position where some of the actions will be quite difficult. I absolutely agree with what everyone said on ventilation, except one point, and this is the practical point that needs to be raised. For some of those major spaces, like gym halls and dining cafeterias that every single school will have, that becomes a much more complex question to answer, and it becomes a much more expensive solution to get in. And this is where we are going to be trading off against what is the best solution. At points even this year, because of Omicron, we've had a situation where NHS looked like it was at a critical point again. Now, we've not been there for probably about a year before. So even though the cases that were resulting in fewer fatalities, the impact on NHS was still absolutely enormous, as recent as just a couple of months ago. So we can't assume that this is over and that we can all just get back to life as normal, but we need to be led by the evidence at this point, and we will have to live with this for some considerable time in one form or another over the next few months and probably years to come. But it's about finding a model that works and is sustainable and puts young people and our staff at the absolute heart of it.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Adam. I think, it's one of these things that, we all accept that we're going to a different stage, but our members are very uneasy about the lack of sort of health and safety support we're receiving. And I think the introduction of HEPA filters will go a long way to alleviate some of that stress and concern. This isn't over, even though there are plenty out there that seem to think it is, and it will come back and cause problems for schools very, very shortly as we pick up through the term and we start seeing more and more staff absences. And I think it's something we can't afford to ignore and pretend it's not there. But I think we need to move on to the next question. So thank you for answers on that. And the next question is related to EAL provision. And we've had a lot of questions about this and related topics, but I'll put one specific question to the panel. But if you want to comment more widely on what your party will do to improve support for pupils with additional needs, then that would be very, very helpful. So the specific question comes from Sonia Kordiak. supply teacher and EIS member. The Scottish Government's school census of September 2021 states that the city school had, in the categories ranging from new to English to competent, over 13,000 learners who were English as additional language learners. The majority, over 7,000, were new to English. We can assume some of these learners will include Syrian refugees who came here previously, as well as some of the more recent arrivals from Afghanistan, 219 in total having arrived from there last September. Added to those children and young people, we now know of the 52 orphans from Dnipro and Ukraine who are here now. And it is reported that over 100 refugees have so far arrived in the city from Ukraine. It is reasonable to assume there will be children and young people amongst them, many of them who will have different levels of English language acquisition. It is also reasonable to assume that more children and young people will arrive as more visas are processed. Given this context, does your party intend to increase the number of EAL teachers working in person in our schools to support the learning of all refugee children? And what provision will you put in place to support those who are experiencing trauma and or bereavement due to the situation in their homelands? Can I start with, I'll start with Richard actually, please.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. So trauma and this entire idea of trauma is baked into the curriculum for excellence. So it's then looking about making sure that all teachers are well aware of you know, what trauma is, how it can be triggered, how it can manifest, and the root causes for it. So that's something that you can address with CPD and through teacher training initiatives. And looking at making sure that we have qualified and enough EAL teachers, you know, again, it comes back to funding. I would love for there to be more in schools because we desperately need more teachers, but we have to fight for the funding.
Okay, thank you. Ross.
Thanks, Phil. I think this is an area where we're not getting it right for every child. Indeed, in health and wellbeing lessons that I do, I regularly refer to Article 18 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Article 18, every child has the right to an education. If we are, as a city council, are not giving provisions to EAL children, then that is us not getting it right. So I think this is where we in budget negotiations or education and family, on the Education and Family Committee, we must get it right. There's no second chances with this, particularly for young children who are starting at early level or first level, who need an immediate understanding of perhaps different cultural norms that are over here, as well as actually making sure that they can achieve and access their learning. So I think as with a lot of discussions we've had tonight, it will come down to funding. And of course, this will be something that must be negotiated after the election, but it is something we need to get right first time.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Oh, thank you. I thought I was muted, I wasn't. So I think funding is the key challenge that we face. Certainly all my lifetime, this has been a topic of discussion. And I think all my lifetime people have argued that we spend insufficient, or we put aside insufficient budget to cover the need. I don't think that budget can be made up by the council. I think that would have to come from the Scottish Government. Within the council's funds, within the funds that the council has discretion over, I think our choice is to increase the funding available to head teachers so they can make choices within the schools, within their schools and with their staff teams. And if they choose to spend money in that way, that is their choice. So I think our preference would be to give head teachers greater discretion over the funding within their schools.
Okay, thank you. Adam.
Thanks very much. And can I thank in particular, actually, and if there's anyone on the Hustings from this school, you can do a digital Mexican wave from Dalry Primary School, who raised this and doggedly pursued it, and I'm really grateful to them for doing so, because it put it on the agenda, it put it on the map, and it meant that we had to continue to drive action. There is improving coverage across the city. There is a significant issue with getting some of those languages. I can speak about the Ukrainian situation right now, in that we're trying to get more people who understand language linked in with schools that most children are going, because of the nature of the programme that's been built. That's relatively easy in some areas, because we're seeing a concentration that the council's in relative control over. In other areas where it's homes for refugees more around the city, that's increasingly difficult. And it will be difficult to embed culturally appropriate, as I think last speaker said, and language competent staff and support and volunteers within those schools right across the system. It will be certainly more difficult than it has been for other things. That said, it has been, I think, an area that we've leaned into, and we need to continue to lean into it. We do have a commitment in our manifesto to increase, and we've kept the language quite deliberately vague, pupil support assistance within the city, because while I absolutely accept this is an element of teaching staff as well, to get kids up to speed with language so that they can integrate into the wider classroom experience, and I totally accept that. But it's also about resourcing, how we resource that full package of support within our schools. Hundreds more teachers and classroom assistants over the last 5 years. We need to go even further. And this is one aspect I was talking about in my opening remarks, of real pressure. We are a very international city, and that's a great thing, but it does come with this issue.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next question is from Adela Mansour, EIS member and Edinburgh teacher, and it relates to mental health and well-being. Before the pandemic, it routinely took about a year to receive any response from CAMS for referrals. Now it's more like 18 months to 2 years. How will you ensure that support provisions are put back in place and enhanced for those pupils with the greatest level of need? Can we start with Richard, please?
Brilliant. Thank you. I've been waiting for this one. So the CAMS waiting list is massive, and it is a total shame. So Edinburgh Labour, as I mentioned very briefly earlier, is looking at a programme of community wealth building, and a key facet of that is bringing council services, for example, CAMS, back in-house. I think this is going to have a massive impact in reducing the wait time, but also in trying to break down that stigma that I talked about earlier around PEF funding. And by having this joined up thinking of services that are working together, that are paying fair wages without 0-hour contracts, we can address this crisis holistically, as well as trying to tackle poverty and inequality wider in society.
Okay, thank you very much. Ross.
Thank you, Phil. So I, on a personal level, feel every school should have a mental health first aider. We have first aiders, of course, for bruised knees and for injuries, but of course it's really important that we look after the mental health of our staff and also our learners. So having a trained mental health first aider in every school is something that I, if elected, and also I know that Green colleagues will argue for. Mental Health for England have a really good example of this. In London, there is a near completion rollout of every school having a mental health first aider. And I think it's crucial, if mental health first aiders are teachers, that they are given their time back. So if they are required to speak to a pupil during class time, that they are given their time back. This categorically should not be, and we're very emphatic about this, should not be on teachers' lunch break, should not be at the end of the day. It should be protected time for teachers that are mental health first aiders. And we know the importance of good mental health. It can affect attainment, it can affect punctuality, can affect attendance at school. And a key fact that stuck out in my mind was that half of all diagnosable mental health illnesses begin before the age of 14. So that's why, yes, we need to tackle unacceptably high long waiting lists. And that's, of course, a result of the COVID pandemic and issues of loneliness and isolation and a lack of social interaction, particularly with younger children. But I think a big push for myself on a personal level, and green counsellors will be having a trained mental health first aider in every school.
Okay, thank you very much. Adam.
Thank you. I actually agree with virtually everything the last two speakers have said, but I did want to hone in on what our specific manifesto commitment is, because we know this isn't bitty, this is really holistic, and we've got in our manifesto commitment to consult with schools on what that holistic mental health and wellbeing support looks like, and that's acknowledging the pressure on CAMHS and the waiting lists which have went up. It's acknowledging the need within the schools and within young people right across our communities, and we need to deal with the impact of increasing demand on counselling services. That holistic approach based in the school, I think is going to be key to try and deal with that. It would be great to say, if we just give CAMHS or somebody else a bit more money, can they deal with that need? I think, actually, following on probably from what Ross just said, it's about that early intervention, holistic approach within the classroom that I think will make the difference.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult problem. And I mean, mental health has probably been underfunded for a long time in the UK. I know there are moves to try and increase the funding towards mental health, and I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. But my understanding is we also have a shortage of practitioners in this area, which cannot be solved particularly quickly. So I think there is, I think some of the things that have been described might work effectively, and we should certainly try them. But the long-term solution is probably to look at training more practitioners, so that we actually have a greater supply of people that can help us all and our students with our mental health.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. I'd like to add a little supplemental question to that, if I may. I'd like you to also, if you could, to comment on how you would support mental health and well-being of staff, particularly in the light that our recent survey showed that nearly 70% of Edinburgh teachers said they felt stressed frequently or all the time. I'll just pass that back to Ross, please.
Sure, I think that's a fantastic question. I think mental health first aiders, just to reiterate the point, can of course be accessible to children as well as colleagues. I think on the broader point about actually reducing workload is really important, because I regularly see surveys from EIS. I saw surveys recently about quite a high percent of staff feeling stressed. I was quite surprised by a lot of those surveys, because I was surprised it wasn't 100% saying they were feeling stressed. But I think more broadly, the Scottish Green Party supports EIS's demands, the 2020 demand from a few years ago about achieving class sizes with a maximum of 20. We all know the benefits smaller class sizes have. We also want class contact time at the moment, 22.5 hours, phased downwards so that it goes from 21 ultimately to 20 hours. And of course that allows for planning, for discussion with colleagues, and of course that will go some way to reducing feelings of stress and actually teachers enduring and having to put up with an undue work burden.
Okay, thank you very much. Jim?
Yes, I think I agree. The surveys that I've seen suggest that there is a significant problem. I think that has been the case for probably the whole 5 years I've been a counsellor. And it was something that I think was reinforced by the Tanner report when people had the opportunity to say how they felt about the way they were treated within the council. So I think there is an issue here, and I think it's a leadership issue. And I'm not sure if I can promise significant additional resources to solve the problem, but I'd be very interested to know what we could do differently in terms of the way we organise ourselves and in the leadership that is provided within the City of Edinburgh Council to try and make people feel more content at work.
Okay, thank you very much. Adam, briefly if you can, so we can move.
I'll be as quick as I possibly can, because this is something that I've spoken to my local head teachers and some of my local teachers about. And I don't want to be glib, but this does really need a sustained conversation between the officers, with the members involved, and the trade unions. And I know that that is happening, and I know that a lot of this is progressing. I want to just talk about one thing, though, that is not particularly resource intensive, but it is important to get operationally right. I know, because I hear it time and time again, the additional pressures put on teachers and head teachers when incidents happen in the school and classroom, the ICT issues that everybody has to go through, and the frustration and time that these things all take. I totally get it. And we need to work through those issues and improve them. It needs root and branch. Some of that is happening anyway in things like ICT upgrades and better linking in and understanding where teachers and head teachers are coming from. Some of it is about systems change and how we can make that easier for the teachers that are having to log these things. So it's about looking at what a teacher's day looks like and finding solutions, not hoops after hoops after hoops for people to go through, because time after time I hear that as one of the major frustrations from people working in the city around me.
Okay, thank you. Richard.
Phil, could I add a quick something, if that's okay?
Yes, Ross, yes.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it. We're needing a new Macron. Now, I know that we are now putting in a pay claim for teachers. Part of that is going to have to be, I think, a new Macron. Class sizes reduced to 20, class contact time reduced to 20 hours. A new Macron, although it has to come from the Scottish Government, is, I think, you know, if you keep your finger to the pulse on this, what a lot of teachers are asking and will end up demanding.
Okay, thank you, Ross. Richard.
Brilliant question. So I want to start off, next year is going to be my 10th year in the classroom, and the annual burnout for about 50% of teachers is after year 5. So both Ross and I are part of the lucky few that have made it past that kind of critical threshold. And thinking back on some of the darker days, especially when I was very, very new, one of the big ways that I handled the stress was with mindfulness, and it's something that I've spent a lot of time professionally looking into, and the research is just astounding. And it's something that I have been introducing into my classes, and I see Claire saying there, 28 years, well done you. But integrating mindfulness, both for us and for our pupils, has the potential to be transformative. And I have no doubt in my mind that within the next 10, 15 years, as the research becomes ever more certain, that is something that we will begin to see. Now, the reason that I am such a big fan of mindfulness is because it inhibits the production of cortisol being the stress hormone. So by teaching people how to do that, we can kind of toggle off the stressors triggered from the fight, flight, freeze response that our brains perhaps
Richard,
not the handiest thing. And I will wrap up now by echoing.
Have to move this on.
Yes,
okay.
smaller class time.
Rather than sort of talking about the virtues of mindfulness, I think we need to move on. So, but thank you very much. And thinking of staff stress, the next question relates to ICT. And of course, I could, in fact, take up the entire evening with questions relating to just IT issues. There are so many to go through, but this is one very straightforward question, and hopefully we can have very straightforward, speedy answers on this. It's quite simply, will you commit to increasing the numbers of ICT technicians working directly in school, and in particular ensure that primary and special schools have access to specialist ICT support. Can we start with Jim, please?
I think I've mentioned before that we would favour giving head teachers greater discretion over their budgets, and if that's a way they wish to spend their money, then they would be free to do so. I think that would be quite an expensive commitment to give and would inevitably result in less money being spent elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. Nice and to the point, Jim. Thanks very much. And Adam, please.
Yeah, I'm aware this is one of the key demands that was discussed with Lorna relatively recently. I think we absolutely have to look at it. I can't sit and guarantee exactly what level of resource will go into that. What I absolutely can't commit to is continuing that conversation and getting to a much more positive place. Every school has to have a link in for that support. Every school has to see that as a support, not a burden. And I absolutely understand from schools why a lot of the time it absolutely feels like more of a burden than a support. So I'm absolutely committed to continuing that conversation and making sure that we get the very best out of it. But I don't think just now I can say exactly what that resource commitment is going to look like, but I absolutely can commit to continuing that conversation.
Okay, thank you. Ross?
So I think we all know that digital literacy is very important, and it's going to become more and more important, particularly as the world becomes more connected, more globalized. We really need to make sure that our children are becoming increasingly digitally literate. I think that having specialists within schools would make a big difference, ICT specialists. I know the frustration, I feel the frustration when ICT isn't working, about raising a form, waiting 10 days, and the ICT technician sometimes not showing. That's a frustration I know that many teachers feel. So I think having on-site ICT technicians would be a great start. And again, whether that's trained teachers or someone that's looking even perhaps for career progression, I think that is something that needs to be protected teacher time. So if there is an issue, an immediate ICT issue, and a teacher is required, the specialist is required, that they are given that time back, that their time is protected. In terms of kind of broader kind of greener technology issues, there's a great set of modules happening in Leavenmouth in the Firth of Forth, whereby turbines are being created, and there are kind of virtual reality modules that children can go to. So on a personal level, I would support trips for children who are learning perhaps in their topic about renewable energy, to actually go and visit some of these hubs and actually learn more.
Thanks, Ross. Richard?
So in my school, we're fortunate enough to have a permanent ICT technician, and he is absolutely fantastic. What it does expose is that there are considerable problems arising from our contract with CGI. And so rather than just looking at the technicians, let's make sure that the contracts that we have are in-sourced within the council, that they are responding quickly, and they are fully kind of resolving issues when they come up. And I think that is a much more practicable solution, especially if we don't manage to win more funding, than kind of offering more technicians.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, again, we've had a lot of questions that are similar to this, sorts of variations on this, and it is, what are you going to do to improve recruitment and retention of PSAs who play such a vital role in supporting pupils? Can we start with Adam, please?
Thank you. Again, I know this is one of the key aspects that has been talked about by EIS, along with the management. I think we've covered some of it already tonight in terms of contracts and climate, in terms of the atmosphere that people are working in. So yeah, I mean, we do need to progress it we are committed to putting additional funding in. We have, you know, taken action over the last 5 years to increase some of the budgets relevant for that. I would expect us to, well, we will be going further based on our manifesto commitment. In terms of retention, it is some of the things that have been talked about tonight, which again, we need to continue the conversation on and progress further. So yeah, I've got no other comment beyond some of the issues that we've talked about tonight around contract stability and things like that.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Yes, hello. First of all, can I just say I agree with the comment Jacob's just put in the chat, and I think the point is that we do want to try and find a way of giving substantial budgets to head teachers. In terms of retaining anybody in any employment, I think an employer has to understand what the reasons are for people choosing to move on and then to address those. So if conditions aren't satisfactory, if pay isn't satisfactory, then those things have to be addressed. And that's what any employer anywhere in the country has to tackle. And I don't think Edinburgh is any different.
Thank you, Jim. Ross?
So I think, frankly, this is about having strong trade unions who are able to bargain for their members. I know that pupil support assistants can, of course, you know, be part of a union in their workplace. But I think EIS could maybe be a fantastic example for other unions to follow, which is that we are relentlessly campaigning to constantly further our members' interests. And I think organisation and unionisation amongst pupil support staff is absolutely critical in terms of pay, essentially, you know, to feel valued, to feel part of the wider school community, appropriate levels of pay, and feeling that, of course, that they're valued is absolutely essential. So I think stronger unionisation, so collectively staff can fight for better wages.
Thank you very much. Richard?
So I want to start off by talking about a wonderful PSA who's been in my classroom since February, and I found out, or it was announced today, that she's going to be leaving us. And she's going because, in her words, it's just too intense right now, and I can understand that. But she has just been absolutely brilliant, and I was deeply saddened to hear that she'd be leaving us. So I just want to start off by recognizing the Herculean effort that PSAs have been putting into our classrooms, and with the diversity of needs growing, we have to recognize and celebrate their work. And you know, for Edinburgh Labour, we're doing that. So our focus is going to be on PSAs, and we're looking at how PSA contracts can be improved with a view to making more contracts permanent and looking to increase the salaries as well. Now, I want to refer to the chat, and I think Maria and Alison have brilliant points there that PSAs need career progression as well as access and time for CPD.
Okay, thank you very much. And sorry, did I cover everyone there? I think I didn't I? Have I missed? Yes, I did. Sorry, lost track of myself there. So moving on, again, we are going to have to try and speed things up ever so slightly, but we have a lot of questions from supply teachers, and whilst some relate to the need for more permanent contracts, there are some who will continue to want to work as supply through choice. And the pandemic has shown how vital that having a pool of supply teachers who can offer support to schools is. Yet many supply teachers are reporting to us that there's a continued lack of clarity and consistency around pay, bookings, terms and conditions, and so on, and it's causing them to consider stopping doing supply work altogether. So just to give us, well, from an example of the question is from a supply teacher, Kenny Smith. The question is this: a supply teacher can work in a number of different schools in any 1 month. Different hours accrue for each school, but on the pay slip, only total hours paid is shown. It's difficult for the teacher to know exactly what each school has or has not submitted in its returns to the council. These returns are in different format from the confirmation of hour sheets teachers are provided with by school business managers. The council has been asked about this before by teacher union representatives, but it refuses to change its system. So what will you do to address this and other concerns from supply teachers? Can we start with Jim, please?
Thank you. So I apologise, I wasn't familiar with this particular challenge. That sounds deeply unsatisfactory. In any of my other employments and where I've employed staff in other businesses, it's pretty fundamental that you get to see the hours you've worked and the pay that derives from that. And I think it's pretty poor that as a council, as a big organisation, that we cannot provide that to valued colleagues. And I certainly would like to understand from officers why that has not been delivered so far.
Thank you, Jim. Adam?
Thanks very much. I know, again, this is one of the things that's been raised, not only certainty around what that pay looks like, but certainty around the advertising of those roles versus the reality that people have on the ground. And this is very much part of a fair work agenda that we've driven forward. I should just say my camera has frozen. So, oh, there we go, I'm back. It froze just for my screen. So it was, my immobility was distracting me. So as part of a fair work agenda right across the board, we're now not only talking about fair work as in jobs, but fair work as in hours, and making sure that people have that proper take-home pay. But the other point I want to make, and I take issue with a slight aspect to the question. I don't think it's the council is refusing to change. I think what the council is saying is it's a very big, complex, difficult pay structure which we're trying to reform. And I very much hope we get to the point that we can reform it. It's not easy, and I know this is not an easy conversation between the management and the unions and involving elected members. It is not simple, but we are absolutely committed to doing that. So I don't think it's a case of refusing to take action. I think it's a case of having to do a lot of work and work through the issues, which my party is absolutely committed to do.
Okay, thank you. Ross?
I think this is why we need a new Macron, so everything is completely black and white in that sense, in that supply teachers know fully what to expect. And I think if there is a discrepancy about pay, and it's shown that supply teachers have been underpaid, that there is a same-day payment made to those teachers by the council, I think that's just the right thing to do. I think more broadly, I've always thought on a personal level, you know, just as councillors can claim mileage for going to the city chambers, I've always felt supply teachers should be able to claim mileage, you know, for being asked to go between schools. I know that's slightly different between authorities, but I think a broad principle, again, why we need a new Macron, so that supply teachers can budget, of course, like everyone else. And supply teachers have kind of, you know, been at the forefront of our kind of COVID recovery, you know, in terms of going to different schools, filling teacher absences and so on. And I think also it's about time that we did Garfect for supply teachers, getting it right for every teacher.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to agree with everyone who's spoken. I mean, if workers feel that they are not getting paid fairly for the work that they have done, you know, one easy way is to make sure that the work they have done has been broken up on the payslip. And if, you know, I don't know exactly why that is a complicated thing to do, but if elected, I'd very much like to try and find a solution and to work with the unions to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. It is now just gone 8 o'clock, but I do have 3 more questions that I think I'd quite like to squeeze in, if that's okay with everyone. If I can sort of ask you to keep the responses to a minute or as fast as possible, we should be able to get through them in about 10 to 15 minutes, if that's okay with everyone. Just nods of heads will do if you're happy to stay on. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. The first question I want to ask is, it's from and on behalf of parents, and it actually, to be honest, it should be able to get a fairly quick answer, to be honest. The question is, will our panelists agree to having 2 parent reps on the education committee with at least 1 vote. Also 1 senior pupil. And if not, why are there 3 religious reps on the education committee, all with votes? And I'll start with Adam.
Thank you very much. I'm again going to potentially be the least popular person on the call by saying no. I'm not going to commit to that. If we'd had our chance, we would not have. I don't think religious representatives on the call. I think the individuals themselves, don't get me wrong, are fantastic. The additions and the new members that we've had over the last 5 years have been really, really good, particularly the other religious representative, if you like, of the rabbi, who I know very well. And I certainly added something to the committee and brought something new. But fundamentally, this has to be about clear decision making. We can't get to a position where we're not able to function and really deliver what we need to. We need to deliver the best educational estate possible for our young people. We need to deliver the highest number of teachers and classroom assistants and deliver the very best for our young people from, you know, birth right up until college and university and into skills work. So there's a lot we need to do, and we need clarity in doing.
Thanks, Adam. Jim.
So first of all, every councillor on the committee should be representing parents. That's what they're there to do, along with representing every other citizen in the city. We've not discussed this particular issue as a group, so I can't give you that commitment tonight. What I would say about religious reps is my understanding that is a legal issue, and that at this moment we are bound to have those religious reps on the committee.
Okay, thank you. Richard?
It's an interesting question, and I don't disagree entirely in principle, but you know, particularly having a student on it, I think that's a really great idea. But I think, you know, and I don't think there should be any unelected religious representation, but it does raise the question of how are these people chosen? Is it going to be just? Is it going to be equitable? Is it going to be representative? So I think, you know, it's an interesting suggestion, but we need to get the terms of how it would be done kind of laid out before I'd want to commit the party.
Okay, thank you. Ross?
So we would be supportive of that position if the positions were elected. That's part of our localism agenda. Through a fair voting system, I think it's absolutely right that is explored as an option. Having seen and kind of observed kind of parent council meetings, it's not usually that well attended. I think there might be kind of issues of engagement there. So if there are to be elected positions, I think it needs to kind of have as much support as possible within the community. Just to reiterate, a fair voting system. This kind of threads in quite neatly to the reforms we want to see of the SQA. Just quickly, the Board of Management we feel is no longer fit for purpose. We want half of the members on the new board, whatever replaces it, to be a mixture of EIS reps, parents, and also one member from the Scottish Youth Parliament.
Okay, thank you very much. We're now on to our penultimate question. Again, I'd like you to try and keep it brief as possible, although I realise that this question probably does deserve quite a lot of discussion, but nonetheless. So this question is from Des Lowney from E2UC. And it's relating to what your parties are going to do to tackle child poverty. With the current rate of inflation, cuts in universal credit and increased fuel poverty, child poverty is set to rapidly increase in the autumn. What extra resources must be given to Edinburgh schools? Can we start with Richard, please?
Yeah, this is a massive question. So obviously with child poverty, it's an issue that has multiple different causes, and you know, only part of that can be addressed within the school. So to come back to a recurring theme of the evening, we need to make sure that we are getting fair funding, and that needs to come from Holyrood. So outside of that, making sure that there's provision for healthy meals, and then turning outside and, you know, especially kind of looking at breakfast clubs and stuff like that. But outside of that, making sure that there are well-paid jobs for every citizen in an affordable house that is well insulated and fit for habitation. We are not going to eradicate child poverty without looking at the root causes throughout society, and we must address them simultaneously along with the cost of living crisis.
Thank you very much. Ross?
So this is a profound question, and I think you're absolutely right. It's not something you know, that we can, you know, solve or aim to solve, you know, in the immediate future. This is all something that's going to require a lot of long-term planning. I know that the Edinburgh Poverty Commission has done a lot of kind of studies and background information. We have a lot of SIMD data, so we know where children by the postcode are living. In the area I'm looking to represent, we have some of the worst poverty rates actually in Scotland. We're in the top 5%, some areas of deprivation. And when you think about, you know, how global Edinburgh is as a city, how prosperous Edinburgh is as a city, don't forget that we still have high areas of deprivation. Now, the Edinburgh Poverty Commission has stated that 1 in 4 children in our city, in one of the richest countries in the world, are living in poverty. And in some areas, that's as high as 1 in 3. So I said at the outset that we have doubled the Scottish Child Payment. That is making a real difference to parents who have seen their purchasing power decrease, and we're also extending it to £25 later on this year. And I've seen firsthand, working in a primary school setting, the fantastic impact, and I'm so proud of this, of introducing free school meals to our children, which will be extended to primary 7 by the end of by August. That is tackling hunger, it's tackling the poverty-related attainment gap. It's not a magical cure, but it goes a long way to reducing stigma, and it goes a long way to beginning to tackle child poverty. And as we've already stated, you know, this isn't something that we can resolve imminently. It's something that is going to take time.
Okay, thank you. Adam?
Thanks very much. If you'd started with this question, we could have talked for the entire night about it, because it's really the central thing about this is what our attainment gap is. This is what our equality gap is. This is what distinguishes the opportunities somebody has in Pilrig or Prestonfield or anywhere else in the city and sets the course for their life. There has been a lot of good work done. There has been a lot of money in the hands of people. One of the fundamental conclusions of the Poverty Commission, which I led in many ways as council leader and led through my committee in the adoption of it and the scrutiny of the implementation of it, was the fundamental universal truth, which is you tackle poverty by getting money in people's hands. And that's it. In a nutshell, that's it. If people are not worried about heating or eating, if people are not worried about the fundamental decisions that people will take for granted in other communities, they can allow themselves to advance and progress and take advantage of much more of the opportunities in our city. And the opportunities are vast and they've been talked about very well. And we need to harness some of those opportunities and success. Policies like the tourist tax might be kind of glib fodder for some of the newspapers, but it's really important that we take the areas of success in our city and harness them to the areas that need investment. I would ask people to ask themselves this question going into the polls on Thursday: who gets this? Who gets it as an issue? We were given £6.5 million as a council just a few months ago to spend on basically whatever we wanted. Very vague, 4 definitions of what it could be spent on. I decided that had to be spent on dealing with the immediate crisis that people were being plunged into. So every child entitled to a free school meal right now has £100 in their parents' pocket because of the decision we took. £500,000 of additional money went into the hardship fund so that anybody facing the crippling cost of living crisis can get access to support they need. and people with council tax reduction could get access to money, as well as the money provided.
Sorry, I'm going to have to move you along. Sorry, Adam.
Ask themselves, people should ask themselves who understands this and who will prioritise the solutions we need.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Adam. Jim?
Yes, so clearly a lot of these matters are not determined in council. And I think we've heard the same debates backwards and forwards for many years. I do agree with Adam though in one respect, which is in our city, how do we harness the success of some areas to help develop areas that are less successful? And, you know, we're quite a compact city. We don't cover a large area. There are parts of my ward where you could walk in 40 minutes to the centre of town, which still have quite significant deprivation. So how can we persuade students in those areas that they are only a 40-minute walk from one of the most successful cities in the UK and in Europe, and that the world can be their oyster and there is nothing to hold them back? Because we used to have that ethos in Scotland, and I'm not sure if we are doing everything we can today to promote that again. And so I do think that is something as a councillor I'm very interested in, because I think education is the route out of poverty. It always has been, and I think it always will be.
Okay, thank you very much. So moving on then to our final question of the evening, and this is from Ailey Gittis. The question is, what do you genuinely think attracts teachers to the profession in a climate of understaffing, decimated early years education, decimated ASN support, ridiculous levels of paperwork, in primary especially, lack of career progression with less promoted posts, stress, violence, and other issues that we have heard here tonight? And I'll start us off with Jim again, please.
Well, that's a very unfair question, because I was attracted to the profession and I chose not to pursue it. And I guess it was because it was a very tough gig. And I remember driving home from school thinking about what bottle of wine I was going to open. And at that point, I thought it wasn't the right job for me. And I looked around staff rooms and saw a lot of people that were considerably older than I was at that time, and they didn't look very happy. So I think there's a real challenge here. What can we do as an employer to try and make sure our very valuable teaching staff are enjoying their job? Because that is something every employer should be looking at in the private sector and in the public sector. And I'm quite distressed that what I'm hearing is that we don't sound like we are doing that very effectively as a large employer.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. Adam.
Thanks. I get there's issues that we need to work through. I get there's issues of frustrating paperwork that make the role difficult, and as Jim said, probably imagining which particular cocktail is going to be mixed that evening. I totally get the frustrations of the role, but I also get what's fantastic about it. The experience of teachers who wax lyrical about the successes that they have delivered for young people, the turnaround in young people's lives that they've delivered is transformative. And I don't think I could imagine, obviously I think that I have the best job in the world, but I don't think I could imagine a better job and more job satisfaction than helping a young person set the direction to maximise their opportunities in life and progress. It is a fantastic role. We need to do what we can to make it better. I get there's frustrations. I get there's issues in the atmosphere that people work in. That's why we need to improve culture, both in a kind of intangible sense and making sure that it's as supportive as possible, but also in a physical sense. And we're committing to £140 million as well as additional schools and nurseries and things being built within our school estate, because actually, having visited some of the new schools that we've built and some of the investment we've made in our existing school estate, it can't be underestimated how much that investment in our people, our young people and our teaching staff actually makes to that sense of well-being within the role. So I get there's challenges, but I think it is one of the most fantastic roles within our council, and I would absolutely encourage people into teaching in this city or right across Scotland without hesitation.
Thank you very much, Adam. Ross.
So 2 words: social justice. That's what fires me up. That's what gives me fire in my belly. You know, and twinned with that, it's also about letting kids know that their aspirations are limitless. And, you know, if you want to be First Minister of Scotland, if you work hard, if you know your craft, you can be anything that you want to be. And that is something I think that we sometimes overlook, you know, as a society, and actually having and giving children that belief that yes, they can have aspirations that are limitless. I think secondly of all, you know, just a kind of personal sort of memory, you know, I used to love having the Christmas fairs as a primary school because it was open to the community, and older children that I had taught who were at high school, you know, would come in as part of our open Christmas fair, and just chat to you. And, you know, as a probationer, I always remember the story of a P5 learner who wasn't able to read. And she has said to me years later, you know, Mr. Muller, thanks to you, I'm now able to read in high school. Moments like that are so rewarding, and they give a bigger reward, you know, than any investment in a bank ever could.
Thank you very much, Ross. And Richard, please.
Yeah, so I get to say I love my job, and as Ross has just kind of outlined, there are lots of reasons why, but for me, it is giving someone the chance that they never got. It's being their personal champion. It's showing them that they are valued and valuable, and it's telling them that they get to dream, and they get to dream big because they are worth it and they can achieve it. I'm a big fan of critical literacy. I think Paulo Freire in Pedagogy for the Oppressed, you know, when I read that book, it really opened my eyes. And what I would like to do with the rest of my career is to make sure that I keep on helping young people by giving them the skills that they need to succeed, but also the critical mentality that will allow them to reimagine and to build the new world that we all need. And that's what gets me up in the morning, and that's what has kept me in the profession.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Well, that just about concludes it for this evening. We've overrun by about 20 minutes, but I think if we were able to open things up to wider debate, I'm pretty sure we'd be here till about midnight, but we are going to have to bring this to an end. So first of all, I'd like to thank all our panelists, Richard, Ross, Adam, Jim. Thanks for your contribution tonight. I'd also like to give a special thanks to our 2 BSL interpreters, Nicole and Stephen, who've done a fantastic job for us. And of course, I'd like to thank Heather for her invites and her organizational skills and making sure I know which button I'm supposed to press. So thank you very much, Heather. And I'll call it an evening unless Alison would like to say a word before we all sign off.
I think we'd like to thank Phil, who's not very long been our president and was a bit thrown in the deep end with chairing all this, and also our participants, because we're kind of new to this. It's the first time we've done this, so hopefully we'll have lessons to learn how we might do it slicker next time. But thanks for everyone, and I think it's really important. Education matters so much, and I don't think there's been enough about it in this election, to be perfectly honest. So I think it's good that this at least has happened. So thank you.
And I'm pretty sure I don't need to remind anyone to go out and vote, of course. But again, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone. Bye.